Welcome to the world of sci-fi stories, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share the channel. Enjoy the listening. A warship so advanced, the only response was surrender or run. The battle had been decided before it even began. Commander D.N.E. Luther stood at the bridge of the Vanguard, watching the enemy fleet scatter like insects before a storm. He had fought 100 battles in his lifetime, but never one as lopsided as this. Never had he commanded a ship so terrifyingly powerful that entire armadas surrendered the moment it appeared in their systems. And yet this was the reality now. The Vanguard wasn't just a warship, it was a declaration, a final word in any argument, the product of humanity's desperate need to survive in a galaxy that had long treated them as nothing more than a nuisance. Commander, came the voice of his tactical officer, Captain Rina. The enemy fleet is in full retreat. They're abandoning their capital and jumping to deep space. No resistance. D.N.E. let out a slow breath. Of course, they are, he muttered. The species known as the Juhari Dominion had ruled this sector of the galaxy for over 600 years. They had crushed human colonies, enslaved human civilians, and dismissed Earth's demands for peace with laughter. The idea that humans could stand against them had always been a joke in the Dominion's halls of power, but now there was no laughter. D turned to the massive holo display at the center of the bridge. Wreckage floated in the vastness of space, the remains of the Dominion's 3rd and 7th battle groups. The Vanguard had fired a single salvo at each of them. One barrage, no second volley required. Status of the enemy flagship, Dan asked. They haven't moved, Sir. Rayna replied. No power readings, no distress signals. It's like they frozen in terror. Dan nodded. Open a channel. A moment later, the bridge filled with the trembling face of Admiral Kin, the Dominion fleet commander. His scales, normally a deep emerald, had gone pale, a clear sign of shock. His slit pupil eyes darted left and right as if expecting death at any moment. What have you done? He stammered. This is impossible. D.N.E. leaned forward. No, Admiral. This is the future. The Juhari had underestimated humanity for too long. When Earth had pleaded for a truce, the Dominion had mocked them. When Earth had fought back, the Dominion had crushed them. But after the burning of Europa colony, humanity had stopped begging. They had stopped fighting with outdated ships and hopeless strategies. Instead, they had built Vanguard, a warship so advanced that no fleet in the known galaxy could stand against it, a weapon that could turn entire planets to dust. With a single bombardment, its armor was impenetrable, its weapons beyond anything the Dominion could comprehend. And now the galaxy was beginning to understand. You have one chance, Admiral. D.N.E. said. Surrender. Your forces disband. Your fleets leave human territory for forever. Admiral's mouth twitched, caught between fury and terror. You can't possibly expect the Dominion to accept. Then run. Dan cut him off. Because there will not be a third option. Silence. The Admiral's throat convulsed as he swallowed. The bridge crew waited, breath held. They had seen many battles, many deaths, but nothing like this. No blood had been spilled, no desperate fights, no heroic last stands, just the overwhelming, terrifying realization that no force in the galaxy could stand against one ship. Then Admiral T exhaled. His shoulders slumped. We surrender. A hushed silence fell over the bridge. Even though they had expected it, the weight of the moment still struck them hard. An entire Dominion fleet, the pride of their empire, had fallen without firing a single shot. Dan nodded. Transmit the official surrender. If any of your ships so much as twitches the wrong way, we will erase you from existence. Gave a hollow nod before the transmission cut. Rina exhaled and turned to D.N.E. Sir, we've just received word the Dominion High Command has sent out a general retreat order. The entire sector is falling back. Dan leaned back in his command chair, his mind still processing the gravity of what had just happened. It wasn't just a victory, it was a message. A war had just ended before it could begin. But deep down, D.N.E. knew the truth. This kind of power didn't just end wars, it created them. And somewhere in the galaxy, someone was already trying to build something stronger, something that could challenge even the Vanguard. And that was a war they weren't ready for. The celebrations on the bridge of the Vanguard were muted. No cheers, no triumphant laughter, only the quiet hum of systems, and the occasional exchange of glances between crew members who were still trying to grasp what had just happened. Commander Dan Luther sat in silence, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. Victory had come so easily that it felt wrong. The Dominion had spent centuries as the dominant power in the sector. They had waged countless wars, crushed rebellions, and subjugated entire species without hesitation, and yet today they had fled like cowards. Sir, incoming transmission from Fleet Command, Reyna announced, breaking his thoughts. Admiral Rains wants a full debrief. Diane sighed. He had known this was coming. Put it through. A second later, the image of Admiral Lucian Rains appeared on the central holo display. The man's face was etched with years of war, his dark eyes sharp and calculating, unlike the rest of humanity's brass. Rains had never believed in peace with the Dominion. He had been one of the chief architects of the Vanguard project, and now for the first time his creation had been tested. Commander Luther Rain said, his tone carefully neutral. I see the battle went as expected, if you can call it a battle. Dan replied. Rain smirked slightly. I trust the Dominion understands the situation now. They do. Their admiral surrendered without resistance. We detected a full-scale retreat across multiple systems. The Johari Dominion is abandoning human space. Rains nodded, his expression unreadable. Good, then the real war is about to begin. Diane frowned. Sir, the Dominion will not let this stand. Luthor, they didn't fight because they didn't know what they were up against. But now that they've seen the Vanguard, their high command will do one of two things. Either they will collapse under the weight of their own fear, or they will adapt. Denon had considered this himself, but hearing Rains say it out loud made the unease in his gut settle deeper. The Dominion wasn't known for surrendering permanently. Their pride wouldn't allow it. If they had retreated, it wasn't out of acceptance, it was because they needed time to figure out how to strike back. What's our next move? DNE asked. You stay put, Rain said. Reinforcements are en route to secure the sector. The Vanguard is now the single most valuable asset in the entire fleet. We can't risk you chasing the Dominion into a trap. Dan clenched his jaw. So we just sit here, yes, and let them feel their defeat, let them stew in it. Fear is a powerful weapon, Commander. Right now, the Vanguard isn't just a warship, it's a legend, and legends are harder to kill than ships. Rains disconnected, leaving the bridge in silence. Once more, Rena exhaled. I hate it when he's right. Dan didn't respond. He turned his eyes to the vastness of space, where the wreckage of the Dominion fleet still drifted like the bones of ancient Titans. Something about this victory felt wrong. It was too easy. Something was coming. He could feel it. And when it did, the Vanguard might not be enough. For 3 days, the Vanguard remained stationed in the ruins of the Dominion fleet. Human warships arrived in waves, securing the sector as the Johari continued their retreat across human space. News of the Vanguard's victory spread like wildfire. Some called it a turning point in history, others whispered fears of what it meant. Humanity had never possessed such overwhelming power before. But not all power was a blessing. Commander DNE Luther sat in his quarters, staring at the tactical readouts on his console. He had read the same reports over and over again, searching for something, anything that didn't add up. There, the Dominion had abandoned everything too quickly. It wasn't just their fleets that had retreated, they had left entire planets behind, stations still operational, supply depots untouched. It was like they had fled in a panic, as if something even worse than the Vanguard had frightened them. It was the part that disturbed DNE the most. Sir, Rena's voice came through his communication. You need to see this. Denon sighed, pushing himself up from his desk. He made his way back to the bridge where the crew was gathered around the main holo display. Rena gestured to the screen. We picked up a Dominion transmission, a distress signal. Diane frowned. From a retreating ship. Rena shook her head. From a Dominion world, one of the planets they abandoned. It came from Zenus Prime, a major industrial colony. Deuce frown deepened. They left an industrial world behind. That makes no sense. Play the signal. The bridge filled with the crackling static of a broken transmission. Then a voice. They left us. They left us all. The voice was panicked, filled with raw terror. The fleets are gone. We begged them to stay, but they knew what was coming. Dan's stomach turned to ice. The message continued, broken by bursts of interference. Not human, it's not human. We Thought a wet, choking sound screams in the background. Oh God. It's here. Then silence. The transmission cut out. No one spoke. A cold, sick feeling spread through the room. Rena was the first to break the silence. That wasn't fear of us. Her voice was quiet, almost a whisper. That was fear of something else. Dean clenched his fists. Get me an analysis of that recording. Find out exactly when it was sent, and get me a full scan of Zenus Prime. The crew scrambled into action. Within moments, data flooded the screen. The distress signal had been sent 6 hours ago, but the planet, sir, one of the officers said, his voice shaking. Zen's Prime is gone. Diane turned sharply. What do you mean gone? It's just not there, the officer stammered. No heat signatures, no power readings, no life signs, nothing. It's like the entire planet was just wiped out. A deep, heavy silence settled over the bridge. DNE felt his heartbeat slow. The Vanguard was the most powerful ship in existence. The Dominion had fled before it without firing a shot, and yet they had left entire worlds behind because they were running from something even worse. And whatever it was, it had just erased a planet from existence. Dan exhaled. He knew what had to be done. Prepare for a jump, he ordered. We're going to send this Prime. Rena hesitated. Sir, if something took out a whole planet, do we really want to go charging in blind? DNE looked her in the eye. If we don't, we'll never know what we're up against. The Vanguard turned, its engines burning bright as it began its jump toward Zenus Prime. To whatever horror waited for them in the dark, the Vanguard dropped out of hyperspace into what should have been the orbit of Zenus Prime. Instead, there was nothing. The planet, the entire planet, was gone. Commander Dane Lither stared at the holo display, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. There were no debris fields, no shattered crust or drifting remains, no sign that a world had ever existed here at all, just emptiness. Rena swallowed hard. Sir, is this some kind of sensor malfunction? Double-check everything, Dan ordered. I want deep-range scans. I want every kind of detection we have running. I don't care if you have to measure the cosmic background radiation. Find me something. The bridge crew scrambled, working furiously to make sense of the impossible. The last known location of Zenus Prime was right in front of them, but the planet itself had simply vanished. And yet, there, Rena whispered, pointing to the display. At first it looked like nothing, just an empty void where a planet should have been. But as the sensors deepened their scan, something unnatural emerged. A wound in space itself. It wasn't just a lack of a planet. It was a lack of everything, a hole in reality, a tear where there should have been mass energy, even time itself. Diane felt his pulse slow. This wasn't a super weapon. This wasn't an orbital bombardment or some kind of Dominion doomsday device. This was something else, something that didn't belong in their universe. Her, one of the technicians, said, his voice hollow. Weck detecting whispers. DNE turned sharply. Explain. The officer's hands trembled as he pulled up an audio frequency, its faint, buried deep in the background noise, almost like a transmission. But it's wrong. Rena hesitated. Play it. A moment later, the bridge filled with a low, distant murmur. It was garbled, fragmented like a broken signal from another reality. The words were impossible to decipher, yet they carried a feeling, a sensation that slithered into the back of Dee's mind. Something was watching them. Rena's breath hitched. That sounds almost alive. The whispering grew louder. Diane felt it in his bones. Now an unnatural pressure crawling through the ship. It wasn't just sound, it was something else, something that shouldn't exist in their space. Then the lights flickered, alarms blared as the Vanguard systems scrambled, flickering between errors that made no sense. Gravity fluctuation detected, hole integrity, unknown engine output fluctuating. And then a voice, not from the speakers, not from the consoles, not from the ship, from inside their heads. You should not be here. Dan felt his breath seize. The entire bridge crew went silent. Every single one of them had heard it, a voice speaking not in sound, but in thought, as if something vast and unknowable had just turned its attention toward them. You are fragile things. The whispering grew deeper, stronger. It wasn't just noise anymore. It was pressure, like the weight of something incomprehensibly massive pressing down on their reality. And then, for the first time since its creation, the Vanguard's advanced AI panicked. Error, 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 unidentified entity, detected, threat level undefined. Suggested course of action. Run. Dan had never seen that before. The Vanguard had been designed to fight anything, to stand against entire empires without hesitation, and now it was telling him the only option was to flee. Rena's voice was tight with terror. Sir, orders. DNE clenched his fists. Every instinct screamed to retreat, to run, to get as far away from this thing as possible. But if they left now, they would never understand what had truly happened. Here they would never know what had erased an entire planet. And worst of all, they would never know if it was coming for them next. DNE forced himself to breathe. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to turn the Vanguard around and jump as far from this void as possible. But if they did that, if they fooled without understanding what had happened here, it would only delay the inevitable. This thing, whatever it was, had erased a planet. There was no guarantee it wouldn't do the same to another Dominion world, to a human world, to Earth. Dan steeled himself. Status report, he ordered, forcing the fear from his voice. The crew hesitated, but Rena moved first, her fingers flying across. Her console systems are stabilizing, but the interference is increasing. Whatever that presence is, it's affecting the ship at a fundamental level. Gravity distortions are intensifying. Another officer reported, it's like space itself is warping. Dai exhaled. Tactical readout. Do we have any readings on the source? Rena hesitated before shaking her head. No single point of origin. It's like it's coming from everywhere at once. DNE narrowed his eyes at the display. The void where Zenus Prime had been was no longer just empty. Something shifted in the darkness, just beyond the edge of detection. Not an object, not a fleet, a presence. And it was watching them. You do not belong here. The voice, if it could even be called that, slithered through Dan's mind again. It wasn't a message, it wasn't a transmission, it was direct, as if reality itself had decided to speak to them. A cold dread settled over the bridge. The entire crew heard it, felt it. Dan clenched his fists. If we don't belong, then what does? The silence that followed was more terrifying than the words. And then the stars flickered. Rena gasped. Sir, what the hell is happening to the system? DNE turned sharply to the viewport. Space itself twisted. The stars in the distance warped and stretched, their light bending as if something unseen was wrapping around them. Something massive, something they couldn't even begin to comprehend. And then the void moved, not in the way a ship moved, not in the way planets orbited or fleets maneuvered. It shifted as if reality itself was being rewritten, folding in ways that defied everything physics understood. Rena's face was pale. Sir, we're detecting readings inside the ship. Dan's heart stopped inside before she could respond. The lights flickered again, and then deep within the corridors of the Vanguard, a scream echoed through the ship. Raw, primal, impossible. Dom's blood turned to ice. Where was the comms? Officers' hands trembled. Deck 12, sir. Another scream, then another. The ship's AI sent a warning across all channels. Internal breach detected. Non-physical entity present. Daily shot to his feet. Security teams deploy to Deck 12. Seal off all critical systems. He barely had time to process the order before the Vanguard's power systems flickered again, and then for the first time since its creation, the Vanguard's engines died. The greatest warship humanity had ever built, the unstoppable force that had made the Dominion surrender, was now dead in space. And something had just stepped aboard. D grabbed the armrest of his chair. Weapons online. Full internal lockdown. No one moves alone. Rena's breathing was shaky, but she kept her focus. So, sir, if it's already inside, what do we do? Diane clenched his jaw. There was only one answer. They survived. The Vanguard had never known fear. It was the pinnacle of human engineering, designed to stand against any enemy, to turn the tide of any battle. It was built to be unstoppable, and yet for the first time it felt fragile. The ship's engines were dead. Its power core flickered in and out of stability, and worst of all, something was inside. Dan's grip tightened on his armrest. Report from Deck 12. The security officer, a younger man named Kovic, paled as he read the live feed. Sir, we're getting scattered reports from the teams en route. Hallways are shifting. Dan's stomach twisted. Shifting, how they say it's like space isn't stable down there. Corridor stretching, twisting into places that shouldn't connect. Whole sections that just shouldn't exist. Sir, I don't understand. Another scream erupted through the comms, and then Gunfire Security Team Bravo to bridge. A voice shouted, "Contact, we have static." "Then you struggle like insects." The voice came from everywhere, and nowhere, seeping into the bones of the ship itself. Diane saw some of his crew instinctively back away from their stations, as if physical distance could protect them from something so utterly alien. Then came the sound. It wasn't mechanical, it wasn't technological, it was wet, a sickening, shifting slither like something impossibly large, dragging itself through corridors that were too small for it. Rena's hands trembled over her console. "Sir, we just lost contact with Security Bravo." Dan forced himself to remain calm. "Deploy drones, we need visual confirmation." A few seconds later, the bridge hollow display flickered to show the drone feed. The halls of Deck 12 were wrong. The clean metallic corridors of the Vanguard had become organic-like. Something had grown over them. The walls pulsed flesh-like, with dark veins running through them, twisting and spreading as if the ship itself had become infected. And then the drone's camera caught movement. A shape slithered across the frame. It was tall, hunched, with too many limbs bending the wrong way. Its skin was black like space itself, absorbing the light around it. Its head, Dai's breath hitched. There was no head, only an ever-shifting mass of mouths, whispering, laughing, screaming, in voices that were human dominion, and things he didn't recognize. Then the creature turned towards the drone. It didn't have eyes, it didn't need them. The whispers grew louder. The drone's camera shattered into static. Silence filled the bridge. Rena's voice was barely a whisper. What the hell was that? No one spoke. Dan finally exhaled. "Lockdown Deck 12, nothing in, nothing out." The security officer hesitated. "Sir, our teams, they're already gone," DNE said, forcing his voice to stay. "Even we can't risk this spreading." The truth was, he didn't know if it could be contained. If this thing had already infected one deck, there was no telling how deep it had spread. Then the whispering changed. It spoke. "Your warship is a coffin." The air grew thick, like the very concept of space inside the bridge was being warped. The walls groaned, metal flexing, as if the ship itself was struggling to exist. Rena's breathing was ragged. "Sir, if we don't do something now, we're going to lose this entire ship." Dan's mind raced. Every decision mattered now. There was no second chance, no reinforcement fleet coming to save them. It was just them trapped in deep space with something that had erased an entire planet. And it wasn't just inside the ship, it was becoming the ship. Dine made his decision. "Prepare for a reactor purge," he ordered. Rena snapped toward him. "Sir, that could destabilize the core. If we don't do it right, we could. If we do nothing, we die." Dan cut in. Rena hesitated, then nodded. DNE turned to the comms officer. "Open a shipwide channel." The moment it was Liv, he spoke. "This is Commander Lither. All hands prepare for emergency procedures. We are purging the core. Repeat, we are purging the core." Throughout the ship, alarms blared. A reactor purge meant venting every last drop of raw power in the Vanguard. A desperate measure to burn out any foreign presence. If it worked, it might force whatever this thing was out of the ship. If it failed, then the Vanguard would be nothing more than a lifeless hunk of metal drifting in deep space, and they would still be trapped with it. Diane turned back to Rena. "Do it." She took a deep breath and initiated the purge deep within the ship. The reactor screamed as its energy was ripped free, flooding the entire vessel with a violent, raw wave of power. And then the whispers turned into screams. Not human screams, not Dominion screams. Something older, something not meant to be in this reality. The lights exploded in a flash of white, and for a split second DNE saw it. Not the thing in the corridors, not the mouths, but what lay beyond the void, an impossible shape, a twisting mass of gravity and darkness, folding in on itself in ways that hurt to look at. Not a creature, a concept, a force that had no name. And in that moment, DNE knew this thing hadn't just destroyed Zenus Prime. It had eaten it. Then everything went black. Diane woke to silence, not the usual silence of deep space, the familiar hum of a warship's engines beneath his feet, the soft beeping of consoles, the murmur of officers speaking in hushed tones. This was true silence, the kind that pressed against his skull like a vice. For a brief, terrible moment, he thought he was dead. Then a voice, "Commander." Dan's eyes snapped open. A sharp pain lanced through his skull, and his vision swam. The bridge was barely lit, bathed in the dim glow of emergency. Power. Some consoles flickered, struggling to restart. Others were completely dead. Rena knelt beside him, gripping his shoulder. Her face was pale, her hair damp with sweat. "Are you with me?" Dan forced himself upright, his muscles aching. His mouth was dry. His uniform was damp. Sweat. Blood. He wasn't sure what happened. His own voice sounded hoarse, like he had been screaming. Rena exhaled in relief. "The purge worked, I think, but it nearly killed the ship." DNE looked around. The bridge crew was scattered, some still unconscious, others groaning as they came to. The ship's main holo display was offline, and the emergency lighting cast long, eerie shadows across the room. "Systems?" Dan asked, forcing his mind to focus. Rena grimaced. "Bad. We're running on backup power. The core is offline, engines are down." And she hesitated. Diane's gut tightened, and what Rena swallowed. "Deck 12 is still wrong." Dan's breath slowed. "I thought the purge, it burned something out of the ship." "Yeah," Rena said, rubbing her arms as if fighting off a chill. "But it didn't undo what had already happened. That growth, the organic mass in the corridors, it's still there." A deep, gnawing unease crawled up Dan's spine. "Casualties?" Rena's face darkened. "Security team Bravo is gone. No remains, no sign of them. Just gone." Dawn clenched his jaw. He had known deep down that they wouldn't make it, but hearing it confirmed still sent a wave of guilt through him. "Deck 12 is sealed." But Rena hesitated. "I don't think it's empty." A cold weight settled in Dan's chest, meaning Rena didn't answer immediately. Instead, she turned to the ship's comms officer, Kovet, who was barely staying upright at his station. "Tell him," Rena said. Kovet swallowed hard. His face was ashen. "Sir," he said, his voice shaking, "we're still receiving transmissions from Deck 12. Dan's fingers curled into a fist. "From who?" Kovet licked his lips. His hands were trembling as he brought up the audio logs. The bridge speakers crackled. Then a voice. "This is Security Team Bravo. We are alive. We are trapped. Please." A wet, twisting sound. Then another voice. "Commander, it hurts. Please." Dan's blood ran cold. The transmission shouldn't exist. He had heard them die. The purge should have killed everything inside that sector of the ship. And yet the whispers hadn't stopped. They had just changed. For a long moment, no one on the bridge spoke. Kovic turned to D, his expression pleading. "Sir, what do we do?" D inhaled slowly. Every choice led to danger. If they investigated, they risked losing more people. If they ignored it, they might be leaving something alive in their ship, something that wasn't human anymore. The whispers intensified. "It's dark. We can't feel our hands. Are we real? Are we real?" D made his decision. "Seal off Deck 12 permanently." He ordered. "Shut down all comms from that sector. No one goes in, no one comes out." Kovac hesitated, but Rena nodded grimly. "Understood." Kovac's fingers hovered over the console. "If we cut them off, we'll never know if they were really alive." Dan exhaled. "They aren't alive. Not in a way that matters anymore." With a single keystroke, Deck 12 went silent. The whispers were gone for now, but deep down DNE knew the truth. They hadn't escaped whatever had infected Zenus Prime. They had just locked it in with them. And it was only a matter of time before it found a way out. The silence after the purge felt unnatural. Even with Deck 12 sealed, the weight of what had happened lingered over the crew like a heavy fog. Every officer on the bridge moved carefully, speaking in hushed voices, as if raising their volume too high would wake something up. Diane sat in his command chair, staring at the dead hollow displays. The Vanguard was still crippled, drifting powerless in deep space. They had survived, but barely, and whatever they had fought was still with them. "Rena," he said finally, "give me a full assessment. Can we get the core back online?" Rena leaned over her console, scanning what little data they had. "The purge burned out half our systems. The reactor is in lockdown mode. It'll take at least an hour to manually override engines. Our dead weapons, our offline shields are at 4%. Dan exhaled slowly. They were sitting ducks. "And communications, short range only." Rena said. "Long-range comms are completely fried. No way to call for help." Dan clenched his jaw. That meant no contact with Earth, no warning to the about what had happened here. They were alone, and they had no idea if that thing was really gone. "Sir," Kovac spoke up, his voice hesitant, "we have another problem." DNE turned toward him. "What now?" Kovac swallowed, then hesitated before bringing something up on his screen. Emotion alert. Dan's muscles tensed where Covet tapped a few keys. It's faint, but we're picking up movement on Deck 12. A cold weight settled in Dean's stomach. That's impossible, Rena whispered. That whole sector is locked down. It's moving inside the sealed zone. Covet corrected near the maintenance corridors. Dee's thoughts raced. They had burned that thing out. They had sealed Deck 12, but now something was still moving. And then a new alert. Kovic's face turned pale. Sir, something is tampering with the doors. D&E stood. Which doors? Kovic didn't answer right away. His hands were shaking as he zoomed in on the feed. A long silent corridor appeared on the bridge's central display. At the far end, the bulkhead to Deck 12 stood firm, locked by emergency protocols. No breaches, no sign of damage. But something was on the other side, something that wasn't human. Then the lights in the corridor flickered. A shadow moved behind the sealed door, just out of focus. Not a person, not a creature. Something between those things. It moved wrong, too fluid, like it wasn't fully bound by normal physics. Its limbs bent in ways that defied bone, and muscles shifting unnaturally between too many shapes at once. And then the door shook. A deep, sickening groan echoed through the ship as metal strained. Kovic whispered the words no one wanted to hear. Sir, it's trying to get out. Dan's breath slowed. His mind snapped into focus. No hesitation, no fear, just command. Reinforce all security. Locks on Deck 12, he ordered. Divert emergency power to containment fields. If